What happens when love becomes a lie you're forced to live every single day? The ink was barely dry when the pen slipped from her trembling hand. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock above the ornate marble fireplace. Time seemed to mock her. One signature that was all it took to chain two souls together under the illusion of unity. The witnesses clapped softly. The lawyers smiled with relief. And yet, behind the polite laughter, two hearts beat out of rhythm with the moment. Alara didn't look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the paper before her, that thin veil between freedom and confinement. Across the table sat Adrian Vossaer to a fortune built on glass and steel, and a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom from London to Shanghai. His face was unreadable, sculpted in indifference, the kind of calm that hid storms. To the outside world, this was a union of power, a merger dressed in white lace and champagne. But to the two of them it was something else entirely, a sentence handed down in the language of obligation. The contract had conditions. She was to live with him, appear with him, and smile beside him. No scandal, no real affection, and absolutely no freedom to walk away before 2 years had passed. It wasn't love, it was leverage. Her family's debts were erased the moment she signed, and in return she became a symbol of stability for a man whose empire was teetering on the edge of rumor. That night, as the city celebrated the marriage in glitter and gold, Alara stood by the window of her new home, a mansion that felt more like a museum of someone else's life. The moonlight caught her reflection in the glass, pale and uncertain. Behind her, Adrian's voice broke the stillness. "You can choose any room you want," he said simply, his tone polite, professional, as though he were offering a guest directions, not speaking to his wife. She turned slightly, studying him in the reflection. He wasn't looking at her. He never did for long. "Except mine," he added, almost as an afterthought, and walked away. The door closed behind him with a softness that felt heavier than a slam. For weeks, the house remained quiet. Meals were shared at a long table built for 20, though only 2 ever sat there. Conversations were few, glances fleeting. There were moments when Alara wondered if he even remembered she existed beyond the role she played in public. But in that silence, something else began to stir, a presence, subtle and restless, like the first gust of wind before a storm. Sometimes she caught him watching her reflection in the glass doors during their staged appearances. Sometimes his voice softened when he thought she was asleep. Once, when she fell on the marble steps, he was the first to reach her, his hand steadying her shoulder. His touch lingered a second too long, then vanished as if burned. And yet, she couldn't shake the question that haunted her nights. Who had chained whom? Adrian's world was immaculate. Every movement measured, every decision precise. But behind his control lay a fracture, one she glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments, the way he paused when she mentioned the word choice, or the way he stood at the piano late at night, playing a melody she didn't recognize, one filled with longing that had no place in his life. Then came the photograph. It arrived in a plain envelope slipped under the door of her study one morning. No sender, no note. Just a single image, Adrian, years younger, smiling beside a woman with a familiar kind of sadness in her eyes. The handwriting on the back was delicate, trembling. For what was lost, Alara hid it away, unsure what it meant. But that night, when she brought it up casually, his face changed, the mask cracked for the first time. "Where did you see that?" he demanded in a letter. "Someone left it for me." He stepped closer, eyes dark, searching. "Did anyone else see it?" "No." He took the photo from her hands, his voice low. "If anyone sends you anything again, burn it." He walked out, and for the first time, she saw fear in him. And yet, despite everything, something inside her refused to hate him. There were nights when he would linger outside her room, silent. Once, she found a single white rose left on her piano, a rose with no note, no explanation. It was the same kind she'd mentioned once offhandedly as her mother's favorite. He was a man trapped by his own walls. She could feel it, bound by duty, haunted by secrets. And in a way she couldn't understand, her heart began to rebel against the very contract that had chained her to him. One evening a storm rolled in from the sea. The lights flickered and thunder cracked across the horizon. Alara stood by the library's tall windows, watching the rain blur the world outside. Adrian entered quietly, his step soft against the rug. "You shouldn't stand near the glass during a storm," he said. "Why?" "Afraid I might break it," she replied, her voice tinged with defiance. He almost smiled. "Almost. Some things are easier to shatter than you think." The lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat she sought the loneliness behind his composure, raw and human. It was gone as quickly as it came. Who was she? Alara asked, the question she had been holding back for weeks. The woman in the photograph. His expression froze. He didn't speak. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. Finally, he whispered, "Someone I was supposed to protect. Someone I failed." She wanted to ask more, but he turned away, his shoulders heavy with unspoken memory. That night, sleep refused to come. Alara wandered the halls, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. She found herself in the west wing, the one part of the mansion she had never explored. A single door stood ajar at the end of the corridor. Inside, The air was stale with dust and time. On the wall hung a portrait Adrian and the same woman from the photo. Beneath the frame a faint inscription. Clara Voss, 1993 to 2020. The date hit her like ice. 5 years ago. She turned at the sound of footsteps. Adrian stood in the doorway, his eyes unreadable. "You weren't meant to see this," he said quietly. "Then why keep it?" He exhaled, looking past her at the portrait. "Because forgetting her would make it easier to forget who I am." There was silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that carries weight, the kind that forces truth to rise between words. "She was my wife," he said finally. "And she died because of the same deal that brought you here." Elara felt the air thicken, her pulse quickening. "The contract." He nodded once. "This family's legacy isn't built on business, it's built on bargains. Every marriage a transaction, every promise a price. Clara tried to break it and you," she asked softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "I signed another contract." Thunder rolled outside, as if the sky itself recoiled. Elara stepped closer. "To keep the empire alive, to keep you alive," he said. She froze. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. He moved past her, closing the portrait room door. "Some debts aren't measured in money, Elara." And just like that, he was gone again. The next morning, the staff whispered more than usual. A newspaper lay folded on the table. Across the front page, Voss Industries under investigation. Leaked documents expose hidden agreements. The photograph from before now made sense. The letter, the fear in his eyes. Someone was coming for him and she was part of the reason why. As dusk fell, Adrian returned home. Soaked from the rain, his expression grave. He placed a single envelope on the table. "This," he said, "is your freedom. Signed, sealed, without condition." She stared at it, the paper that once bound her now offering escape. "Why?" she whispered. "Because the walls are closing in and I won't let them take you too." He turned to leave, but she stepped forward, catching his hand. "You think you can save me by letting me go?" He didn't answer. His silence was heavier than truth. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Inside, two hearts stood between duty and desire, bound by paper but rebelling in ways neither could yet admit. As he walked into the rain, Elara's hand tightened around the envelope. Her reflection stared back at her in the darkened window. Half of her wanted to run, the other half to follow him into the storm. And somewhere in the house, beneath the thunder's echo, a faint melody began to play. The same song Adrian used to play at midnight, only this time it wasn't him. The sound grew louder, closer until she realized the piano room door was open. She took one hesitant step toward it, then another, and as the music swelled, something deep inside her whispered that the contract was only the beginning. The melody drifted through the halls like a ghost that had forgotten it was dead. Each note trembled, fragile and deliberate, echoing through the emptiness of the mansion. Elara's pulse quickened. The piano room was supposed to be locked. Adrian always kept it that way. Yet now, it called to her with the same haunting tune he played in the quiet hours before dawn. She followed the sound, her bare feet brushing against the cold floor, the soft thud of her heartbeat matching the rhythm of the keys. The door stood ajar, a faint light spilling out across the hallway carpet. She hesitated. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rain, as though the storm outside had found its way in. Inside, the room was bathed in pale gold from the single lamp by the piano. The lid was open, the ivory keys trembling under invisible fingers. But the bench was empty. No one sat there. The music played on, precise, measured. "Elara," she turned sharply. "You hear it too," she said, her voice low, uncertain. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he crossed the room and pressed a hand to the piano's lid, as though trying to feel something beneath the wood. "Clara's song," he murmured. "No one's played it since she." He stopped himself. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Instead, he closed the piano gently, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. "This house remembers too much," he said, "the kind that eats away at the edges of control." Her fingers brushed the keys, hesitant, and for a fleeting second she thought she felt warmth, there like someone's hand had just left it. She pressed a single note. The sound lingered longer than it should have, as if the air itself refused to let go. The news of the investigation tightened around Adrian's world like a noose. Men in black suits came and went. Elara began to find things. A broken photograph frame in the library, torn pages from a diary. One evening, she found Adrian in his study, papers scattered across the desk, his tie loosened, his hair damp with sweat. He looked less like a man of power and more like a fugitive of his own life. "They'll take everything," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Every deal, every name, every debt." He laughed under his breath, a hollow sound. "You don't understand. They don't just take wealth, Elara." Her breath caught. He said she tried to break the contract. She did. She thought walking away would free us both. But the deal. He stopped, pressing a trembling hand to his temple. He lifted his eyes, and for a heartbeat she saw something raw there, terror wrapped in resignation. "The family, the board, the people who built this empire before I could even choose what I wanted it to be. And I made the same mistake. I thought binding you to me would buy your safety." "My safety from what?" Before he could answer, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. "Alara," he whispered. "Stay behind me." A faint sound, a door closing somewhere in the house. Then another. Footsteps. Adrian reached for the drawer and pulled out a small revolver. "Adrian," she breathed. "What are you? They've come early." The thunder rolled again, closer this time, as if chasing them down the hall. They stopped before a hidden door behind the staircase, one Alara had never noticed before. Inside was a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. "Go," he said. "It leads to the old cellar. Stay there until I come for you." She hesitated. "No, I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. If I don't come back, go to the address written inside. There's someone who can tell you the truth." "Go, Alara." She ran down the narrow steps, her breath loud in her ears, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. The air grew colder, heavier, until she reached the bottom. Dust and cobwebs hung in the air. And there, against the far wall, she saw something unexpected, a collection of old boxes, stacked neatly, labeled in precise handwriting. Voss Holdings, Archive 1982-2020. Curiosity overpowered fear. She opened one. Inside were folders, contracts, correspondence, sealed envelopes marked confidential, a marriage agreement, almost identical to her own. 2 years, public appearances, no dissolution without board consent. If this reaches you, I have already failed. Alara's eyes filled with tears. It was about control, about ownership disguised as loyalty. A crash upstairs jolted her back. Voices, she couldn't make out the words, only the tone, urgent, sharp, threatening. Then, a gunshot. She bolted up the stairs, ignoring the pounding in her chest. Adrian, she found him in the entryway on his knees, clutching his side. One turned toward her, but before he could move, Adrian raised the gun and fired. She dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. "Stay with me, please. Stay with me." His eyes fluttered, pain and relief mingling in their depths. "You shouldn't have come back. I wasn't going to let you fight alone." He smiled faintly. Clara said the same thing once. Thunder shook the windows. She could hear distant sirens. Now someone had called for help. He reached for her hand, gripping it with what strength he had left. "The address," he said, voice weakening. "Promise me you'll go." "I will, but you're coming with me." He shook his head slowly. "They'll never stop, but maybe you can end it. You're not like us. You still have a choice." She pressed her forehead to his, tears falling freely now. "I didn't choose this life, Adrian. I know," he whispered. "That's why you're the only one who can break it." His breath came shallow, uneven. "Tell them, the contracts, they're bloodbound. My father." His words broke off. The sirens grew louder, closer. "Adrian, stay with me," she pleaded, but his hand slipped from hers. The lights flickered once more and went out completely. When they came back on, he was still. The front doors burst open as men in uniforms flooded the hall. Voices shouted, orders flew, and someone pulled her away. But Alara's eyes stayed fixed on him, the man who had been both her captor and her shield, now lying beneath the shattered chandelier, his blood pooling into the marble's veins. Hours later, the mansion was swarming with investigators. Reporters gathered beyond the gates, the storm still raging overhead. They took her statement, her fingerprints, her silence. She sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders, staring at the envelope still in her hand. The ink had run slightly from the rain, but the address inside was still legible. A small coastal town, 2 hours away. The paramedic touched her arm. "Miss, we can take you to the hospital." She shook her head. "No, I need to go somewhere first." The drive was long, the road slick with rain. She replayed his last words over and over. "You're the only one who can break it." When she arrived, dawn was breaking. The town was quiet, the sea stretching out like a sheet of dull silver. The address led her to a small cottage at the edge of the cliffs. The smoke rose faintly from its chimney. She knocked once. Then again the door opened. An elderly woman stood there, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You must be Alara." "How do you?" Adrian called. The woman interrupted softly before he left. Inside, the cottage was filled with papers, maps, old photographs. On the table lay a leather-bound book stamped with the Voss family crest. The woman gestured to it. "He wanted you to have this. Said you'd understand when you read it." Alara opened the book. Inside were generations of names, dates, and signatures, each one linked to a marriage, each one signed in the same ink. Some pages were marked with crimson fingerprints. "What is this?" she whispered. The woman looked out toward the sea. "It's the ledger of the Voss covenant. Every union was sealed with blood, an oath of loyalty to the family's founders. Breaking it means death." Alara's stomach turned cold. "Then how do I?" The woman turned back to her. "You don't break it by running. You break it by rewriting it." Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the first light of morning across the waves. Alara traced her fingers over the newest entry, her name beside Adrian's. Beneath it, a space left blank, waiting. The woman's voice softened. "He gave his life to give you that blank page." Alara closed the book slowly, her reflection shimmering in the window's glass. For the first time, she understood. The contract wasn't the chain anymore. It was the key, and somewhere, deep within her chest, her heart began to beat, not with fear but with defiance. She turned toward the door, the sea wind carrying through the open frame. It was time to finish what he'd started. The wind howled outside the cottage, sweeping through the cracks of the wooden shutters, carrying with it the scent of salt and rain. Alara sat at the table, the old ledger open before her, its pages yellowed and fragile, edges worn like something that had survived too many generations. Candlelight flickered across the ink, revealing lines of names, each one a life folded neatly into the binding of the Voss covenant. Her own name stood at the bottom, black ink, fresh and final. The space beside it, the one meant for Adrian's second signature, remained empty. The woman who had given her the book, known only as Margaret, moved quietly across the room, pouring tea into 2 chipped porcelain cups. "You should rest," she said. "You've traveled far. You've lost much." Ilara's eyes didn't leave the page. "You said the covenant was sealed with blood. What does that mean?" Margaret set a cup before her, the steam curling upward. "It means what it sounds like. Each heir who signed made an oath with the founders. The blood and the ink binds their lineage to the family's will. They thought it symbolic, but it wasn't. It was literal. The contract carries life or takes it." Ilara's voice was barely a whisper, and Adrian, Margaret hesitated. He inherited more than the empire. He inherited the curse that keeps it alive. Outside, thunder rumbled again, low and distant, as if echoing the weight of her words. Ilara traced her fingers over the ink, feeling its faint ridges, the indentation of every name written before hers. "If that's true, then he died because of it, because he tried to protect me." Margaret's gaze softened. "He died defying it. No one in that bloodline has done that before." Ilara looked up, her voice trembling. "You said I could rewrite it." The older woman nodded slowly. "Yes, but rewriting a covenant bound in blood requires more than a pen. It requires what the founders gave and what they took." Ilara frowned. "What did they take?" Margaret's eyes met hers. "Choice." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Then Margaret stood and crossed to a small cabinet in the corner. She drew out a bundle of old letters tied with faded red ribbon. "These belonged to Clara," she said, setting them on the table. "She came to me once, long before you. She wanted to end it too." Ilara's breath caught. "You knew her?" Margaret smiled faintly. "She was like you, brave, restless, unafraid of the truth. But truth has teeth, my dear. It bites back." Ilara untied the ribbon, her hands trembling slightly. The letters were delicate, filled with Clara's looping handwriting. One was addressed to Adrian, never sent. "My love, if you're reading this, I have failed to keep us safe. The board is watching. They know I've found the ledger. They say the covenant protects us, but I've seen what it costs. Every generation loses something, memory, soul or heart. The ink takes it. I've seen their eyes when they sign. It's as if a piece of them disappears. If I cannot return, promise me you will not sign again. Promise me you will not bind another to this fate." Ilara's throat tightened. The candlelight trembled against her tear-glossed eyes. Clara had seen the truth long before Adrian did, and she had paid the price for trying to stop it. Margaret's voice was low, reverent. "She died 2 nights after writing that letter. The official report said an accident. But those of us who knew, we heard the piano playing before it happened." Ilara's mind flashed back to the mansion, the empty bench, the invisible hands pressing the keys. "Clara's song," she whispered. Margaret nodded. "The covenant doesn't let go of its own. It remembers those who defy it." A chill ran through Ilara's veins. "Then that night it wasn't a ghost." "No," Margaret said softly. "It was the covenant reminding you that it's still alive." The storm outside intensified, wind battering the cottage walls. Ilara stood suddenly, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "Then it's not over. If the contract's still alive, it's still binding me. I have to break it." Margaret looked at her carefully. "You can't destroy it here. The covenant was forged in the estate's heart, the foundation room beneath Voss Hall. That's where it must end." Ilaros' pulse quickened. "Then I'll go back." "You'll need help," Margaret warned, "and courage. Once you return, it will know you're coming." Ilara's hand closed around the ledger. "It already does." The next morning the rain had cleared, leaving behind a washed-out sky and the scent of wet earth. Ilara left before dawn, Margaret's words echoing in her mind. She drove north toward the city, the road cutting through fog and memory. Each mile felt heavier than the last, as if the covenant itself was resisting her return. When she reached the mansion, police tape still lined the gates. The house loomed behind it, quiet and decaying, its windows dark. But something in her chest pulled her forward. She slipped through the side gate, her footsteps echoing across the gravel. The front door opened with a low groan. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and silence. The piano room stood untouched. The bench remained empty, but the keys were clean, as if someone had been there recently. She moved deeper into the house, past the study, past the grand staircase, down into the west wing, the place where Clara's portrait hung. The inscription beneath it gleamed faintly in the dim light. Clara Voss, 1993 to 2020. Ilara reached out and pressed her hand against the frame. It shifted slightly under her touch, revealing a small latch behind it. She pulled, and the wall opened to reveal a hidden staircase descending into darkness. The foundation room. The air grew colder as she descended. The walls were lined with stone, carved with symbols she didn't recognize, circles within circles, names etched in Latin. At the bottom she found a vast chamber lit by a ring of candles. In the center stood an altar of black marble, and on it a single quill and a book identical to the one she carried, the original ledger. She approached slowly. The quill was still wet, crimson staining its tip. The ink smelled faintly metallic blood. Alara. The voice came from the shadows. She spun around. From the darkness emerged a man she didn't recognize, tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a dark suit. His presence was unnervingly calm. "I was wondering when you'd return," he said. "Adrian spoke of you." Her breath caught. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "The one who keeps the covenant. Every generation has a guardian. Adrian was supposed to take his place, but he chose rebellion." She steadied her voice. "He chose love." "Love," the man repeated with a faint smile. "A fragile thing. It always ruins the design." He moved to the altar, placing a hand on the ledger. "You've seen the cost of defiance. His death sealed your name. You belong to the covenant now." Ilara's voice shook with fury. "I don't belong to anyone." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Then prove it. Rewrite the covenant. You have the blood. You have the book. But know this: whatever you erase, something else will take its place. Every freedom demands a sacrifice." She hesitated. "What kind of sacrifice?" The man smiled faintly. "The one thing Adrian died to give you." Her heart pounded. "My freedom." "No," he said softly. "Your memory of him." The air seemed to thicken around her. "If I rewrite it," she whispered, "I forget him." He nodded. "That's how balance is restored. The covenant cannot be destroyed, only transferred. His name will fade from your mind, and the cycle will begin anew, without blood, without chains. But you'll never remember the man who gave you that choice." The candles flickered violently, as if the room itself were waiting for her decision. She looked down at the ledger, at the space beside her name. Her hand trembled. Adrian's face flashed in her mind, the quiet strength in his eyes, the way he played the piano as if the music could save him. She could end it. She could free herself and every generation after her, but at the cost of the only person who had seen her, not as a pawn but as a person. Her voice broke. "He told me to break it, not to forget." The man's gaze was unyielding. "Sometimes they are the same thing." The storm outside began again, thunder rolling above the mansion. Ilara closed her eyes, clutching the quill. The blood shimmered at its tip. She lifted it over the page. For a moment, everything went still. The air, the sound, the very pulse of the room. Then, she wrote her name first, then his. But instead of crossing out the old lines, she drew a circle around them, binding the two signatures together. The man's expression changed: confusion, then fear. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Ilara's voice was calm, steady. "Rewriting the covenant doesn't mean erasing, it means redefining. If it demands balance, then I'll give it one." The quill glowed faintly, the ink burning through the paper. The candles flared, the air filled with a low hum that grew into a roar. The man staggered back, shouting, "You don't understand. You can't bind life to death." But she already had. The ledger's pages turned violently, words melting into symbols, signatures fading and reforming. The room shook. The quill dissolved in her hand. Then, silence. The man was gone. The altar stood empty. The book lay open, blank, except for two names written in new ink: Ilara Voss and Adrian Voss. No conditions, no dates, no chains. Her knees buckled. She clutched the table to steady herself. The air felt lighter, freer. But inside her chest, something shifted, something missing. She couldn't remember the sound of his voice. She stumbled out of the foundation room and into the pale light of morning. The mansion was quiet again, serene, almost peaceful. She stood in the entryway, looking up at the chandelier's fractured crystal. The world outside looked unchanged. Yet something deep within her had been rewritten, and though she couldn't remember his name, she found herself whispering it anyway, faint, uncertain, like the echo of a dream fading with the dawn. Somewhere far above, the first rays of sunlight cut through the clouds, striking the piano keys in a single beam of gold. They gleamed softly, as if waiting for a song that only she could play. The morning light filtered through fractured glass, cutting across the marble floor in long trembling lines. Dust hung in the air like suspended time. Ilara stood at the piano, her fingertips hovering over the keys, the silence stretching thin around her. Somewhere beneath the quiet, beneath her skin, something was missing: a sound, a name, a heartbeat that should have belonged to someone she could no longer remember. When she pressed the first key, a note rose, a soft, uncertain sound that seemed to awaken the house. The chandelier swayed ever so slightly. The air moved. The echo of the note lingered, pulling her into a fragile rhythm. Her hands somehow still knew. Her body remembered what her mind did not. The melody built slowly, each note unlocking fragments of feeling: warmth, fear, tenderness, loss. Faces blurred behind her closed eyes. Laughter that felt familiar. A voice calling her name through rain. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him, like a shadow burned into the light. When the final note faded, she found herself trembling. The silence afterward was unbearable, thick with an ache she couldn't name. And then, faintly, from deep within the house, another sound answered. 3 slow notes. from the same melody. She froze. The sound came again, faint, deliberate, somewhere beneath her feet. Her breath caught. She turned toward the corridor that led to the west wing where the hidden staircase waited. The air had grown colder, though the morning sun still streamed through the windows. As she moved, her reflection followed in the polished surfaces, each one slightly out of sync, as if the glass remembered her differently each time. At the top of the staircase, she paused, hand trembling on the railing. The 3 notes sounded again, lower this time, echoing through stone. She descended slowly, her heart pounding. The foundation room waited below, the air dense with the metallic scent of the past. The candles she'd seen before had burned down to stubs, wax hardened like pale tears. The ledger still lay on the altar, its blank pages faintly glowing under the faint light. But she wasn't alone. A figure stood at the far end of the chamber, facing the wall. "Elara," a voice murmured. She froze. The voice was soft, familiar, too familiar. It slid through her like memory. Waking, she took a step forward. "Who are you?" The figure turned. Her pulse stuttered. He looked like Adrian, but not the way she remembered him in fragments of dream or scent. His face was colder, sharper, his eyes a muted gray, as if the color had drained away. His expression carried no recognition, only distance. "You came back," he said, almost to himself. "You shouldn't have." Her voice trembled. Adrian tilted his head, as though trying to place the name. "That was who I was," he said softly. Before the rewrite, the room seemed to tilt. The walls hummed faintly, the stone vibrating with something alive. She shook her head, stepping closer. "No, you're here. You're real. I am what the covenant made me," he said. "The balance you created, the circle you drew, it brought me back. But not as you remember. I am what remains of him." The air thickened, pressing against her chest. "You mean you bound us both to the ledger?" he said. "2 halves of the same vow. You set me free from death, but in doing so, you tied me to the covenant's core. It's using me to survive." Her mind raced. "Then it's not over." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain. "No, it never ends, not unless the ledger burns. But if it burns, everything it binds burns with it, including you." Elara's eyes widened. "You mean the blood in its pages? Yours, mine, every name before us." The candles flickered wildly. The shadows seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beating in her chest. Adrian stepped closer. "You shouldn't have come back. You were free." She looked up at him, her voice shaking. "Free without memory isn't freedom, it's emptiness. I needed to understand what I lost." He studied her face the same way he once had. Before the silence, there was something in his gaze that felt alive again, something struggling against the cold control of the covenant. "You shouldn't remember me," he said. "Maybe not," she whispered, "but my heart does." A sudden sound split the air, metal against stone. The walls of the chamber groaned. One of the candle flames flared blue. Adrian turned sharply. "It's waking." "What is the covenant?" "The circle you drew broke its pattern. It's trying to rewrite itself again, to restore the balance by taking something new." A tremor ran through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. The air filled with a faint scent of burning ink. Elara clutched the ledger. The pages rippled, though no wind touched them. Words began to form, new words spreading across the paper in crimson strokes. "The debt remains unpaid." Adrian's hand shot out, closing over hers. His grip was warm, too real to be a ghost. "Listen to me," he said quickly. "If you destroy the ledger, it ends everything, its control, its history, but you'll vanish too. You're bound to its ink now." She shook her head, tears streaking her face. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," he said. "You gave it balance when you rewrote it. Now it demands imbalance to close." Another tremor shook the room. The altar cracked. One of the candles fell, scattering wax across the floor. A gust of cold air surged upward from the cracks in the stone, carrying whispers, voices layered atop each other, names and vows and echoes of the dead. Elara pressed her hands over her ears, but the voices cut through. She could hear Clara's voice among them, faint but distinct. "End it, don't let it take more." When she looked up, Adrian had stepped back. The light around him flickered, his form blurring slightly at the edges, as though he were caught between presence and absence. "Elara," he said quietly, "I don't have long. The more the covenant rewrites, the less of me stays real." She ran to him, grabbing his hand. It was already colder. "Don't fade. Not now, please." He smiled faintly. "You were never supposed to remember me, but you did. That's how I found you." Her throat tightened. "Then help me end it. Together." He hesitated, eyes flicking to the ledger. "If we try, one of us might not survive the binding." "I already lost you once," she whispered. "I'm not letting it happen again." For a heartbeat, silence felt the storm above, muted, the world holding its breath. Then Adrian's expression softened, something human and fragile breaking through. "Then let's finish it." They moved to the altar together. The ledger pulsed faintly, the words shifting like living veins beneath the parchment. Elara felt the heat of it against her palms. Adrian placed his hand over hers, their fingers intertwining. "You need to call the covenant's core," he said. "It will appear as what you most fear or what you most desire. Don't believe its voice. How do I call it?" "Just open the last page." Her hand trembled as she turned the page. The parchment was blank at first, then letters began to carve themselves into it, curling and twisting until they formed a single line. The heart must choose what the blood cannot. The chamber darkened. The air grew thick, and from the shadows around the altar, a shape began to form, a figure of light and smoke, shifting between faces. For a moment it looked like Adrian, then Clara, then a reflection of Alara herself. When it spoke, its voice was layered, too many tones woven into one. You seek to end what cannot end. You seek to erase legacy with longing. What will you offer in return? Alara straightened, though her body trembled. My name. The figure tilted its head, considering your name binds you to the contract. Without it, you will vanish. You will be forgotten. Then let it forget me, she said. Adrian's hand tightened on hers. Alara, but the light around the figure flared, drowning out his voice. The ledger flew open, pages whipping violently as the chamber roared with unseen wind. The figure stretched toward her, its hand of smoke reaching for the book. Adrian moved between them, shouting something she couldn't hear. The sound dissolved into chaos. The light flickered again, and then the figure's form shifted, solidifying. This time it wasn't a blur of faces, it was Adrian's. Except this Adrian smiled not with sorrow, but with cruelty. His eyes were hollow. Alara stepped back, heart racing. No, she whispered, that's not you. The doppelganger's voice was smooth. You never really knew me. You only knew the man you wanted me to be. Adrian, the real Adrian, reached for her. Don't listen, it's the covenant. It's trying to divide us. The false Adrian laughed softly, circling the altar. Divide she already did. She chose her freedom over memory. She forgot you and she'll do it again. Stop, she said, pressing her hands to her ears. But both voices filled the space around her, merging and colliding like storm currents. The light dimmed, shadows stretching. The true Adrian began to fade again, his outline breaking apart like mist. Alara, he said, his voice faint but steady. If you trust me, if you trust what we were, burn the book. The false one stepped closer, eyes gleaming. And burn yourself with it. The air around her pulsed. Two versions of him, one bound by truth, one by illusion. Two paths, both promising an end. Alara's pulse thundered in her ears. The ledger's pages fluttered open to the very beginning. The names of generations shimmered faintly, each one whispering, pleading, warning. She looked from one Adrian to the other. Her voice shook. If I burn it, I die. If I don't, the covenant survives. Neither answered. The candles went out all at once. The chamber fell into darkness. Only the faint glow of the ledger remained, pulsing like a living heart on the altar. Alara stood between two shadows, one fading, one false, and felt the storm gather above her, waiting for her choice. And then, faintly, as if carried from somewhere beyond time, she heard the melody again, the same song from the piano. But this time it was played by two hands, hers and his, woven together in harmony. She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of both darkness and light. When she opened them again, the two Adrians were gone. Only the ledger remained, glowing brighter now, its final page open, waiting. The chamber trembled. Something was about to break. The silence after the tremor was unlike any before. It wasn't empty, it was heavy, breathing, alive with the residue of everything that had been said and lost. The light from the ledger spilled over the cracked stone, warm now instead of cold, a pulse of amber that bathed the walls in slow rhythmic waves. Alara stood before it, the last candle snuffed out, her reflection caught in the gilded edge of the book. The storm outside had softened into rain, each drop echoing faintly through the cracks of the old chamber ceiling. She took a step closer. The book seemed to wait for her, its glow shifting, steadying, as though it recognized her hesitation. Her hands trembled, but she reached out anyway, the air shimmering faintly around her fingers. When she touched the cover, she felt something unexpected, not the burn of magic or the cold pull of ink, but warmth, familiar, human warmth, like a heartbeat responding to hers. She whispered his name, Adrian. The light brightened once, then dimmed, and from within it came a sound, not words, but music. The same melody that had first called her here. Only now, it was slower, tender, filled with something that felt like memory and release. It wrapped around her, dissolving the sharp edges of fear and confusion. And for a moment she simply stood there, eyes closed, letting it fill the spaces where silence had once lived. When she opened her eyes again, she wasn't in the chamber anymore. She was standing in the old courtyard, the one she'd only seen in fragments before. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. The ivy that had died long ago now curled up the stone arches, lush and green. The fountain at the center trickled softly, reflecting the gray-blue sky. She looked down and saw she was barefoot, her dress faintly glowing as if spun from morning light. Across the courtyard stood Adrian. He looked different this time, calm, real. His eyes no longer gray, but the warm brown she remembered from the life she'd lost. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried too many meanings at once. Apology, gratitude, and the unspoken ache of something that couldn't stay. Alara, he said, his voice steady. You did it. She took a step forward, the sound of her feet against the wet stone blending with the distant hum of thunder. Did what? You broke the covenant, he said softly. The ledger's hold is gone. The names have been released. She looked past him. The walls of the old manor shimmered faintly, their edges dissolving like mist. The air was brighter, softer, as though the world itself was sighing in relief. "And you?" she asked. "What happens to you now?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he walked closer, his hand brushing against hers. It was warm but insubstantial, like sunlight filtering through glass. "I'm what the covenant made of love that refused to die," he said quietly. "And now that it's gone, I go with it." Her throat tightened. "No, there has to be a way." "There isn't," he interrupted gently. "Every contract has an ending, even the ones written by the heart." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you again." He smiled faintly. "You won't. You carry me now in memory, not ink. The ledger bound us to paper, but what we became after that ... It's something beyond the written word." A wind passed through the courtyard, carrying with it the faint scent of lilac and rain. The fountain shimmered around them. Fragments of light began to drift upward, like glowing petals caught in a silent current. He looked at her, eyes soft. "Do you remember the first time I told you why I agreed to the contract?" She nodded weakly. "You said you didn't believe in destiny, only in choice, and you were the choice I made," he said. "Even knowing it would end this way, I would make it again." Her hand reached for his face, her fingertips brushing against light. "Then stay." "I can't," he whispered. "But you can." The courtyard began to fade, the arches, the ivy, even the sky unraveling into a pale white glow. She could feel herself being pulled upward, her heartbeat slowing into stillness. Adrian took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "When you wake, you'll forget the pain. Not the truth, just the ache. You'll live, you'll play again. And every note you touch will carry what we were." Her breath hitched. "And if I forget your face," he smiled, "then maybe I'll live in the space between the notes." The wind swelled, the petals of light spinning faster. His form began to dissolve, each word coming fainter now. The heart remembers what the mind tries to bury. Trust that. Then the world fell silent, and everything turned white. When Ilara opened her eyes again, she was sitting at the piano. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the restored manor. Dust motes danced in the air, but the house no longer felt empty. It breathed with quiet life. The pages of sheet music lay open before her, but there was no ledger, no candlelight, no mark of what had happened. Only a faint, dried ring of wax on the floor near the piano bench. She looked down at her hands. A faint scar traced her palm thin like the line of a signature. She pressed a single key. The sound was pure, unbroken. For a long moment she just listened. Outside, the world moved on. Birds in the courtyard, leaves whispering against the glass, the steady hum of life returning to what had been still for too long. And beneath it all, faintly, she thought she heard it, the echo of a melody she once knew by heart. She began to play. The notes came not from memory but from instinct, flowing one into the next like a confession too deep for words. The melody rose, swelling and trembling, and for a heartbeat, she could almost see him standing by the window, watching, smiling, not as a ghost, but as a reflection in the light. As the final chord lingered, she whispered into the quiet, "The heart must choose what the blood cannot." The sound faded, but the air remained charged, as if the walls themselves remembered the vow. In the days that followed, Ilara stayed in the manor, though she no longer called it a house of contracts. She opened its doors to travelers and musicians, to anyone who sought a place to belong. She never spoke of the ledger, nor of the covenant. But when someone asked her where she learned to play with such emotion, she would only smile and say, "It's not something you learn, it's something you remember." Years passed. Seasons softened the stone walls. Ivy crept back along the arches, and laughter filled the halls that had once held silence. And sometimes, in the late hours of night, when rain fell and thunder rolled softly in the distance, she would sit at the piano and let her hands drift across the keys. Each time, she felt it, the pulse of something still alive beneath her fingertips. Not grief, not longing. Something simpler, purer, the quiet truth of a promise kept. One evening, as dusk spilled through the tall windows, a young student asked her, "Do you believe love can defy what's written?" Ilara paused, her gaze distant. Then she said softly, "No, I believe love rewrites it." The child smiled, not fully understanding, and ran off into the garden. Ilara turned back to the piano. Outside, the last light of the sun caught the glass, scattering it across the room in shifting patterns like the glow of a heart still learning how to beat freely. She played again, not for memory this time, but for presence. Each note was a thread, weaving the past and the present into one seamless, breathing moment. The melody rose, fragile and clear, echoing through the open windows and into the evening air. And somewhere, far beyond sight, she imagined Adrian listening, not as a spirit bound by ink, but as the echo of a choice once made in love, a choice that had broken the chains of destiny and turned even loss into song. The final note lingered, trembling at the edge of silence. Ilara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel the ache of absence, only peace. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, eternal, and in the quiet that followed, her thoughts drifted to a single question, one that had no answer, only feeling. When love outlives the words written to bind it, does it cease to exist, or does it finally become free? The piano's echo faded into the night, leaving behind only stillness and the faint scent of rain, as though the world itself had exhaled. The house stood silent once more, but this time it was not empty. It was alive.